Hi everyone, welcome to Edge of Emotion. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. Let's get started. A man stops to help a woman change her flat tire at the side of the road, a simple act of kindness he's done before. But this time, the consequences are anything but ordinary. The next morning, a black SUV arrives, its presence hinting at a chain of events that will change his life forever. Life for Rick was not exactly a bed of roses. From childhood until his old age, Rick had been through so much mentally, emotionally, and maritally. As a child, Rick grew up with toxic and abusive parents who would beat the living daylight out of him and verbally abuse him at the slightest provocation. At age 9, he managed to get away from his biological parents, but he didn't do so well with his foster parents, and this resulted in Rick making a lot of bad decisions in his teenage years. As a teenager who didn't have parents who cared for him, Rick dabbled into the world of drug addiction, and for the greater part of his adult years, he struggled to break free from the chains of drug addiction. Unfortunately, by the time he was able to get clean, he had lost his marriage and children and the opportunity to work at the company of his dreams. After several failed attempts to get his wife and kids to return to him, Rick finally gave up and accepted that it was his fate to live and die as a lonely old man. Thankfully, he had managed to get a job at a pizza shop in the distant part of town, and with his little earnings, he could afford to take care of himself and his basic needs. Unlike other old men his age, Rick didn't have many friends. His only friend was his neighbor who lived down the street, and sometimes, whenever Rick was bored, he would go down to his neighbor's house to spend time with him and his family. His neighbor, Mr. Freeman, was one of the people who pushed and helped Rick to break free from his drug addiction. Also, he was the one who helped Rick get the job at the pizza shop, because he knew Rick needed a steady source of income. In return for all the love and support Rick got from his neighbor, Mr. Freeman, Rick became a loyal friend. Sometimes, he would help Mr. Freeman do a couple of handiworks around his house. Aside from Mr. Freeman always visiting Rick occasionally, Rick never had anyone else at his house, and each time his doorbell rang, Rick was sure Mr. Freeman would be at the door. One day, after working a late-night shift, Rick was driving home in his old truck when he spotted a young woman bending over her car tire with her phone flash in her mouth. Rick didn't need anyone to tell him what was happening with the woman, because he could tell from a distance. At first, Rick wanted to drive past her because it was already very late at night, and he needed to go home on time to catch his favorite TV crime show. But as Rick drove closer to where the woman was, he saw how frustrated she was and how she struggled with the car jack. Without thinking twice, Rick pulled over behind the young woman's car and honked to get her attention. Immediately, the young woman heard the horn from Rick's car. She turned in his direction and watched as Rick got out of his truck and walked toward her. "You've got a flat tire?" Rick asked in a concerned voice. "Yes, the damn tire must have picked a nail or something," the girl responded with evident frustration in her voice. "Okay, let me help you fix that," Rick said as he bent over to raise the car with the jack. Rick noticed that the young girl seemed hesitant to let him fix the tire initially, but he understood why. It was late at night, and it was quite uncommon for people to stop by and help strangers that late at night. "So where are you coming from?" Rick started a conversation. He intentionally started the conversation to help the young lady get comfortable around him and ease her mind. As he expected, the more the young woman talked with Rick, the more comfortable she became. According to the lady, she was returning from a hangout with her friends, and about an hour into her ride back home, she realized she had a flat tire. After the lady had told Rick about herself, Rick talked about himself too. He told her he worked at a pizza shop and had just returned from working the night shift. Gradually, their conversation moved from talking about their day to talking about their lives in general. The young woman did not speak much about herself, but Rick talked much about himself. He talked about his good friend and neighbor, Mr. Freeman, and his life regrets, and how much he missed his wife and children. From all Rick had shared about himself, the young woman could tell that Rick was remorseful about his past and was just an old man who didn't get the proper parental upbringing. A couple of minutes into their conversation, Rick took out the flat tire and replaced it with the woman's spare tire. Then, when he was done, he grinned widely and said, "I really enjoyed talking to you." Then he walked to his truck and drove away. The young woman enjoyed talking to Rick, but was more grateful to him for helping her fix her spare tire. She thanked him wholeheartedly for his help and drove off after Rick left. By the time Rick arrived home that night, it was too late to watch his favorite crime show, but he didn't mind. He felt more fulfilled by helping the stranded woman, and he felt good talking with someone else who wasn't Mr. Freeman or his family. The next morning, Rick woke up pretty early to work out in his yard. After he was done with his daily workout routine, he did his laundry and cleaned up his house before having breakfast. It was his day off, and Rick's intention was to spend the afternoon by himself. Then, by evening, he would go over to Mr. Freeman's house to spend time with him and his family. Later that afternoon, Rick was watching a comedy show on TV when he heard a soft knock on his front door. At first, he was confused because he wasn't expecting any visitors, and he was sure that his friend, Mr. Freeman, was at work. When the knock came the second time, Rick was forced to go and check who it was. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see a man in an expensive-looking suit and two other men standing by a black SUV in front of his driveway. "You must be Rick, right?" the man in the expensive suit asked. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" Rick responded. "I'm Mr. Gerald, and I'm here on behalf of my younger sister," the man said. Then, he showed Rick a picture of his sister on his phone. "Oh, did she get home safely?" Rick asked. Gerald's younger sister was the young woman Rick had helped change her flat tire the previous night. Yes, she did, and she couldn't stop talking about the kind-hearted stranger who helped her last night. She also said, "You reminded her so much of our late father and his stories." "As a matter of fact, she insisted that I come and see you today," Gerald said. "But how did you find me?" Rick asked. "Don't you remember? You told Sarah many things about yourself, including the street you lived in. All we had to do was talk to a few neighbors, and one of them pointed us to your house," Gerald responded. "Oh!" Rick exclaimed, still unsure of what to say next. "Sarah told me to give this to you," Gerald said, as he handed Rick a white envelope. By merely touching the envelope, Rick could tell what the content was, and the moment he opened it to be sure of what it was, he tried to push back the envelope to Gerald. "No, I can't accept this. All I did was help a stranded woman," Rick said. "And all she wants is to thank you properly for your kindness. Please don't say no." "Sarah will not be happy," Gerald insisted, pushing the envelope back to Rick. Without saying another word, Rick burst into tears and hugged Gerald tightly. "Thank you so much. Words cannot express my gratitude," Rick said as he struggled with tears. "Thank Sarah for me, please. Tell her I really appreciate this act of kindness," Rick said. "Don't worry. Sarah will be here to see you when she's back in the country. She traveled this morning and will be away for a while," Gerald said. "Please come in and let me make you a cup of coffee," Rick said, wanting to appreciate Gerald's kind gesture. "Thank you, Rick, but you don't have to," Gerald said. "One more thing. Sarah told me that it had always been your dream to work at the Golden Leaf Company. Well, I have great news for you. There's an opening at the company, and it comes with 3 months of training. I put in a good word for you, and we'll need your resume," Gerald said with a broad smile spread across his face. The minute Rick heard that, he burst into tears again, but this time he cried like a baby. His dream life was finally happening, and he could not believe it. To Rick, everything felt too good to be true, but 4 months later, Rick's life transformed in an amazing and unbelievable way. Through the money he received from Sarah and the pay he got from his new job, Rick could afford to move into a better neighborhood. Not only that, but he took his friend Mr. Freeman and his family along with him because they were the only family he had. He couldn't imagine living life without them. From that time, Rick maintained a great relationship with Sarah and Gerald, and the two continued to treat Rick like he was their own father. Most often, when you extend kindness to others, you often find that it comes back to you in unexpected ways. Even ways that seem too good to be true. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.